Hello, I'm Pam Ullman, and I'm here with my nephew, Adam Caldwell, to tell you the story of my father, Adam's grandfather, Andrew Nutley, and the journey his family took from Torino, Italy to Canada, first Montreal and then Halifax, Nova Scotia, in January 1939.
We will tell this story as much as we can through the voices of Andrew and his mother, Anna Weber, and through photos of documents and people which were pivotal to their journey out of Europe.
The voice recordings of Andrew and Anna were obtained through interviews Adam and I conducted for classes we both took at different times. I took a family history course in 1990 while a senior at Rutgers, and through preparation of a project for that class, I interviewed all my parents and grandparents. My father, Andrew, and my grandmother, Anna, relayed the story of their family's decision to leave Italy in 1938 and the process of their immigration to Canada in 1939 and what happened beyond.
And I interviewed Andrew for a project in a history course I took in 2016 while a senior in high school. Because we obtained the stories of Anna and Andrew by interviews, you will occasionally hear my voice from 2016 and Pam's voice from 1990 on the recordings when we were speaking with Andrew and Anna. During these interviews, my grandfather showed me documents his father brought with him from Europe in 1939, and which he and Andrew saved for the past 81 years, and which he shared with me, and which we are now going to share with you. We hope you enjoy the journey. We've tried to assemble it so that it accurately tells the story of the young family and the decisions they made that ultimately led to the result of us being able to be here today.
And it begins prior to the Holocaust at the time of my birth, which was June 1, 1938. Prior to that time, my parents were living in Torino, Italy. My father having graduated in medicine from the University of Vienna 1926 and from the University of Rome in medicine in 1928, settling then in Torino in 1929, at which time he and my mother were married. My mother was acquainted with him while both studying in Vienna in the earlier years. She was studying pharmacy because my grandfather, her father, was a pharmacist with his own pharmacy in Yugoslavia, which only became Yugoslavia after the First World War, at which time Hungary lost many of its borders to various other countries that were neighboring them. For example, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Romania. Those three nations took pieces of Hungary and it became their territory. So if we go back to that time, my mother had been growing up in what she thought was Hungary. Later it was ordained to be Yugoslavia, and everybody had to learn the Yugoslav Cyrillic language. But they still maintained their Hungarian roots. She studied pharmacy with the intention of getting into her father's business. And of course that got changed when she met my father in Vienna, and they became engaged and got married and moved to Italy. So that was the end of that plan.
It's funny how one remembers the things when you were young, very young. You remember much better when you get old than the things what happened just recently or not too long ago. So then, well, you want the story, my story from the beginning when I was a young girl?
Yes.
Well, we were two sisters and I had a very wonderful parents. I cannot tell you how wonderful they were. I couldn't tell anything yet, nothing, I just was thinking that I want to have it, I was having it there already. I never had to say I like that or like that, it was there. And my father really thought that I was, my mother already and my sister also smoked, and later on, and I never smoked, and that was already when I was grown up, 1860. And he was very proud of that I taught small. I was a good student, and I wanted to be a pharmacist. And so then I went to high school. I went high school, but then they closed that high school after the First World War. They didn't have in my city just Yugoslav Serb, and I didn't know a word Serb. And my father spoke very good Serb, and in pharmacy you had to speak, and there were lots of farmers there, farmers, poor people. They worked in the fields, and there were lots of them Serb-speaking people, and but they were Germans too. They called them Schwabs, and Hungarians, these three kinds. And so then we at home we spoke all this Hungarian. So my mother didn't know very little Serb, but she went to the market, and in the market there were lots of these women who brought in the produce from the fields, and the eggs and the chicken and the goose and all kind of other stuff. And my mother used to just sew it. We didn't know how to call them. And so I say I didn't know a word. And so then they closed the high school, the Hungarian high school, and that was finished. So I and some other girls wanted to go further to finish up. There was 8 years, they called it gymnasium. So we had to make an exam, and then in the capital of the province, that was now they call it Veliki Bečkere, but that time they call it Nagy Bečkere, again, Nagy Bečkere. And in there, they were, in the morning was in Serb, the lectures, and afternoon was in Hungarian. So we went there. So I was staying with a friend of mine. My parents were best friends with this family, the Gutman Margi. And she was a year older, and she was very best friend of mine, and like sisters. So I lived with her together in a room that was a school, a boarding school. Four years. And then we made the matura, the things, and I got up 6 o'clock in the morning to study. I made it all these A's, but I studied like crazy. And I wanted to do it good. When I wanted to show my father that I am a good student, I can go to university. When I wanted to go, I wanted to say that I will be a pharmacist, and my father had a pharmacy, and I will help him, after he gets old, and I will take it over. I figured I could have married there in my home city. I had a boyfriend, so-called boyfriend, who was a kind of a far relative, not so very far. One of my aunt was married to a man, Levi, and he was a beautiful man too, and that was next to my mother. My mother was the oldest girl. There were 8 in the family, my mother's family, 5 girls and 3 boys. And my grandparents were very well to do. They had a mill. They lived in another city. They lived in a kind of a small town. It was not a big city, but was very pretty, called Módos. And we used to go very often there with the train. It wasn't far, but with the train it took a few hours. When the trains that didn't go so well, they were not at that time. And my mother used to go take the 2 little girls, and we went. And all the holidays, Jewish holidays, and then used to come all the family together, all the 5 daughters married with the husbands and the children. Oh, it was beautiful, and that was a big house. They had land, they had land, and for fellows to work the land. Had cars and horses and all that. That was a big court where all the workers came in the evening with the cars and the horses, not cars, but how they call these wagons, what the farmers have. These wagons, and carriages. And then they had ice, and after, when they dig in the ground and they put the ice, they take the ice and they have it for the summer, in the weather. They had that there, and then from there was a big kind of a fence, and then from the fence was a big garden with trees and around lots of flowers and beautiful, and then was a terrace, and from the terrace we used to sit there in the evening with the lamps, and the air was just beautiful there. And then from the terrace you go in the dining room was big like this apartment. It was enormous. And when the family came together in that room, were sitting all around. It was just something that, and grandmother was sitting on the top there, and the grandfather on the next, and the grandmother there, and the grandfather, and all the mothers and the children, we had such a wonderful time. And then my father used to come, but not so often, but he couldn't leave the pharmacy so much. Although he had the help, at that time I remember maybe he hadn't had help yet. That time when we were so small, and we were that small children. And my father said, why you have to go to Vienna, and that is very nice there, and you study there. Pharmacy, I said, no, I want to go to Vienna. So he didn't want to let me, and my mother talked so much into my father. I cried, and I said, I have to go to Vienna. Just like if my fate was telling that you will meet your husband there, it's very interesting that if you take it philosophically. So finally I went to Vienna. I met Alec on a concert. I told you that already, so you know that. So I didn't meet him there. I just saw him there. And my two sister and that other girl, that friend, that neighbor, also was there. And they kind of looked each other, and they things, two of them. But I never looked. I had all my friends from the university also with me, boys and girls. We were standing place. We went all the concerts. Every night we went to a concert in Vienna. That time Vienna was the most wonderful concert that I ever had. And not so much in the opera as the concert, not so much in the opera, but we went some opera, but mostly concerts. There were famous dedicants, very wonderful singers, and ladies, and very, very nice. And my parents were sending me all the money. They sent money too much. We just went to the bank and there was the money. They didn't stay, we stand in the place, so it wasn't too expensive, but to go every concert. And Alec was every concert too. He was there 10 years. Alec was 10 years in Vienna. 10 years. But he finished it long time ago, the medicine, but then he specialized, and then he worked also, and he did all kind of things before he wanted to come here. When I met him, he said, after once, twice I met him, and then he said, well, we liked each other, and then he said, well, I want to ask you a question. I said, what? He says, would you come to Canada, to Montreal? Nick was already here, and Eugene was here already. And he says, my brothers are there, and they expect me. They want me to come to Montreal and open practice and medicine, not pharmacy, not dentist. So I said, I am not coming to Canada. I don't even know where it is, I said. And it's very cold there, and I am not leaving my parents, stupid as I was. If I came then my parents would have been safe. Well, I came then, I could have brought them over here in time. Yeah. You see, I believe in fate very much. Well, I mean, this is all like, if I would have done that there, then the fate would have been different. I mean, they would have been safe, my sister and everybody. And not everybody, but they. If, I mean, I could have talked to them in, they would have been easy, but they didn't want to leave. If you leave, if you have your home and you have 40, 50 years or so, and old people, they don't, although my parents were not too old, my mother was 50 and my father was 60, and they took them away. 10 years between them. And my mother was healthy, and my father had all his teeth. He was never sick, my father, and all these teeth, and very good-looking man and everything.
We emigrated to Canada in 1939, having left Italy, where I was born, in June of 38. We left Italy in February or January of 1939 at a time when Mussolini had issued an edict that all people of the Hebrew race are to leave Italy immediately. However, it was not easy at that time to emigrate to wherever one chose to emigrate. My father automatically chose Canada because that is where his brothers already resided. His brothers and his sister, one of his sisters. They had come to Canada in the 20s. The brothers did, at any rate. One of the brothers, Nicholas by name, emigrated to Canada after having been involved in a business in Vienna. And my uncle was one who was not married at the time yet, did a lot of sports, a lot of skiing, a lot of other activities, and would leave for extended periods of time, leaving the business in the hands of his partner. On one of these occasions, his partner apparently took all the money and took off with the business, and he was left high and dry with nothing. And at that time, he had had some contacts with friends and other people that had moved to Canada and were making a new life for themselves there, and he decided at that point that since everything was gone to pot there in Vienna, he would at that point move to Canada. This was around 1921. Before he moved to Canada, however, he had no money. So he went to Marseille, France, and he worked on the docks in Marseille for about 1.5 to 2 years, at which time he learned French and also made money for passage. And then he had enough money for passage, he sailed for Canada. And when he was in Canada, when he arrived in Canada, he went west and worked in the stockyards and on fields of the prairies in order to earn money. And then after he had done that, of course, he had heard that the greatest majority of Europeans were in the big cities of Montreal and Toronto. So he chose to go to Montreal, and I guess he had some contacts there. Whatever, he established himself in Montreal. And after a couple of years, he was in contact with his brother, who was the other, whose name was Eugene. And he was in contact with him. And Eugene had been living up to this time in Hungary, not in the city in which they were born, but in another city known as Miskolc. And at that point...
What city were they born in?
They were born in Papa, P-A-P-A, which means Pope in Hungarian. It doesn't mean father. Anyway, he had relocated to Miskolc, which is spelled M-I-S-K-O-L-C, which is a large city in Hungary. And In Miskolc, he met his soon-to-be wife, Piri, who came from a well-known Jewish family there.
Nick used to go, and once he came back, and that fellow who was a far relative or just a friend, I don't know, I said, took all the money and left. And he was left without a cent.
Took whose money?
That from the business, what they had there. I don't know how much that was, but so much that he left without a cent. And that time he decided he is coming out to Canada. But he had no money. Why even to take the ticket to Paris? So Alec, my husband, used to live with him, you know, in the apartment that he had in Vienna. And I had 2 bedrooms, I think. And so every time Nick was having an affair and it brought up a lady in the room, so Nick used to give Alec some money, go to a movie. And he never went to the movie, and took the money and went and put it in the bag. And that's what he told me. I mean, I'm just telling the story, but he told me. And then he went walking, I guess, you know, he went walking or in the park or whatever. He didn't go to the movie. And so when he had a little saving up there, not I don't know how much, but anyway, he took out that money and he said, here is Nick, here is the money, help you with that ticket, to buy the ticket to Paris.
Mussolini, who became a collaborator with the Axis under the regime of Hitler, and the racial laws came down that he issued. The racial laws stated that anybody of a minority birth, or anybody who's of a minority, who's not Italian from generations back, is to be deported from the country. Therefore, the problem here was that my father was a dentist. He had become a physician, but specialized in dentistry, because in Europe, you cannot, under the European under the European university system, you cannot be a dentist without first becoming an MD. So this was a specialty of medicine as opposed to a separate study of its own. This came to bear later on after being in Canada, when he attempted to register in the province of Ontario, Canada, to practice dentistry, and they told him, and I have letters to that effect, they told him that he did not have the proper dental education. So they could not grant him a dental degree. But at that point in time, my feeling was that he should have said, well, fine, I have an MD, scrap dentistry and stay with medicine. But that's not what happened. So switching backwards again to Italy, Mussolini came down with this edict, and my father's 2 brothers and sister were already in Montreal, and there was a lot of letters going back and forth with the intention of getting us, meaning me and them, to emigrate to Canada. And they agreed to do this, they wanted to do this, but there was very little time, because I was born in June of '38, and the war started in September of '39, and it was very, very pressured for anybody of a Jewish background in Europe at that time. So nothing was really done until my uncles, his brothers in Canada, were able to get a hold of an attorney in Ottawa who happened to have some influence with Parliament, or he knew some representatives. And after discussing with them the possibilities, they were able to get a special order in council issued by the Canadian Parliament, which entitled various members of minority groups from Europe, professionals, to emigrate to Canada and it was limited to very few people. And so my uncles were involved with hiring attorneys and getting this done so that we in time could get the paperwork and the visas necessary to emigrate to Canada within a period of a very short period. So if we go back to right after my birth in June of 38, as we all know, the Kristallnacht took place November the 9th of 1938, at which time it was made very, very difficult for Jews to exist in Europe, and they were being deported already and being affected by various Nazi attempts to end their life.
And then in Italy, I never had till Hitler became friends with Mussolini. Then I will start to talk. But you never know the Italian people in northern Italy, like we lived in Turin, what is called Torino in Italy. Northern Italy, and the 10 years that we were there, I just can say the best things of whatever for Italian people. They were just wonderful, just wonderful. And when that came out, these things, what happened, and then my Andrew was born in June 1st, and September 1st started that things, and my Alex sent a telegram to Nick here and said, go to the best lawyer and make all the legitimate, I mean, all the regular way to come in to Canada. I mean, that this visa and everything, not as emigrants, but regular people who comes in. To that you have to have minimum $10,000 in Canadian, American or Canadian dollars, and I'm still Canadian.
10,000.
Then at that time it was a lot of money.
Yeah. 1938.
Or my husband went to the consulate, the Canadian consulate in Turin, and asked, well, how can you go to Italy, to Canada, a regular way, not emigrants. When immigrants, they couldn't. He says, well, you can go as maids, like women, or labor worker, agricultural worker, like farmer. Like farmer, you can buy a farm or you work for a farm. So my husband said, well, I can do that. And then we found out that you have to have $10,000. And then he told Nick that we have the money. And he said, well, okay. Then he went to Ottawa and he got a lawyer, a very famous lawyer. We had to pay a lot of money for the lawyer. The lawyer got all the papers and everything ready, and we were in January 23 or 25th, in 1939, before the war started. The war started in September 39, and we were here already in Montreal. So in 6 months we were here from the time that Hitler, yeah.
When the war started when the war was on the verge of breaking out in early 1939, my father was in touch with his brothers, and they told him that they wanted him to come over to Canada. And at that point he felt that that was the right thing to do. Based on the way things were going over there. However, getting a visa to come into Canada was a very, very difficult proposition at that time. It had been much easier for his brothers to do in the 20s, when it was more or less some sort of open immigration. But in the late 30s, at a time when Hitler was in control and the world situation was much different, it was very difficult. The only way that one could immigrate was that if one had proof of financial stability. So most people just left with the clothes on their backs and a couple of bags, and that was it. But in order to immigrate to Canada at that time, you had to have proof of financial stability. So luckily he had this gold, which he managed to smuggle out of Italy through a friend who was in a diplomatic service. And that friend took the gold to Paris, where it was assessed or valued and converted into Canadian dollars and transferred to Canada as proof of financial stability. It was around $10,000. My father used the medium of gold to secure his assets because cash was not allowed to be taken out. In that period of time, from November until January, he was required to close down his practice, sell all kinds of things, including an automobile, get all the stuff packed up and moved from Italy to Canada, and get passage for us to get over there. This was all done within a 3-month period, and this is what boggles my mind as to how could this be done in such short a period. So we sailed in January of 1939 for New York and in transit to Canada, arriving in the border of Quebec and New York State by train on February the 11th, 1939.
Once the decision was made in September to leave Italy, the process went very quickly. Alec had his brothers retain a lawyer, and the first step, of course, was to ensure that the money was there to satisfy the Canadian government in order for them to issue a visa to the family. Alec kept several documents to chronicle this process, from smuggling the gold for payment, to receiving the visas, to shipping their household effects to Canada, to purchasing tickets for their passage, and through their journey to make a life for themselves in their new country. Andrew now has these documents, and he went through them with me in 2016, describing and translating each one.
There's also a document here from France showing a shipment of gold, which I spoke about before, where dental gold was smuggled from Italy to Paris. And here's a document from a shipping forwarding company in Paris, dated 14th October 1938, addressed to my uncle, Nick Nuss, 50 Pine Avenue East, Montreal, saying that we are advising you that we are shipping on the Ausonia on October the 14th, 38, sailing from Le Havre to Montreal. One package of gold, weight 8 kilograms, $250,000 francs value, and the price of the shipment was 4,000 French francs. This document is of interest. There's another document here from the National City Bank of New York in Paris, ordering a payment by cable of Canadian $1,000. This is for expenses that my uncle incurred. And the interesting part of this is that it's saying that the message on this is saying that Ella arrives, Duchess of Richmond. That's a code, meaning that the gold is arriving. And it was put down as Ella arrives, Duchess of Richmond.
So Ella is gold?
Ella's my aunt.
Oh.
Ella's my aunt who lived in Montreal.
And Duchess of Richmond is the gold?
That's a ship, yeah, but they're calling it the gold. That's the word for the gold. Here's a cable, Anglo-American cablegram, direct cable service between Canada and Europe, dated November 25th, 1938, by my uncle in Montreal to my parents in Hungarian, translated as follows: since 1 month without a letter, clear answer regarding your permit of entry is possible. Here's another cable, Italian Telegramma via Ital Cable, Italian cable company, dated 11/11/1938. And it says here, permit a question of days. It's written in Hungarian. Engedély napok kérdése, which means it is written from Montreal to us in Torino, because we didn't leave till the 1st of January 1939.
Yeah.
It says permission is a question of days. So this is interesting. There are other telegrams that were issued mostly all in Hungarian. There's one here addressed, which is hard to read the date on it. What it says basically is, passport may expire shortly, leave immediately. And underneath that, another one saying, expect permit any day. The notation of the visa permission that was granted by the parliament. There's a lawyer, as I possibly mentioned earlier, that my uncles engaged, who had connections with representatives of the Canadian government. Actually, they were elected members of parliament. And there's a letter here that's addressed to my father in Montreal, although he wasn't there yet. But they used my uncle's address. And they're saying that there's, well, actually, correcting this, the thing was actually addressed to my uncle. And it said here that the order in council may be received by the department tomorrow from the office of the Privy Council. The department wants to know by what steamship line your brother and family, which is us, will travel, as the permit is handled only to the steamship company and not to the applicant. The steamship company advises the immigrant that they have the permit. They send it to them, which permit the immigrants to show the immigration officer to obtain their Canadian visa in Europe. This was dated December 9th, 1938. We referred to the documents being, the permit being granted by the Privy Council through this attorney, Benjamin Goldfield in Ottawa, who had connections. And the statement says as follows. The Committee of the Privy Council, on the recommendation of the Minister of Mines and Resources, don't know why Mines and Resources, advised that the provisions of Order in Council such and such number, dated the 21st of March 1931, which is the date of the edict, prohibiting the landing of Canada of immigrants of all classes and occupations, with certain exceptions, be waived in the cases of 36 immigrants named on the attached list dated December 3rd, 1938. This is signed by William Lyon Mackenzie King, Prime Minister of Canada. And underneath that, approved by Tweedsmuir. Tweedsmuir, dated the 7th of December 1938. Tweedsmuir is the Governor General of Canada, who's the top
British official, right?
He's an official of the representative of the Queen in Canada. He's the top guy. And on this side over here, it says Department of Mines and Resources, 8th of December, 1938. The pages underneath list the names of all of the people who are included in this waiver. They talk about 36. That may include the actual individuals, but there's only 17 listed. This lists the names of all of these professionals who are included in this Privy Council special order in council admitting these people to Canada. If it wasn't for this, there'd be nothing. One of these being ourselves, Dr. Alexander Nussbaum, age 37 years, wife Anna, age 32 years, and child Andras Joseph, age 6 months, citizens of Hungary, presently residing in Torino, Italy, intended occupation of first named research in orthodontia, which is not really the title of what he was going to do, but sort of got twisted around, but it's just as good. Anyway, these things are all the listings of the people included on that order in council, which is quite significant. There's more information on each of these people in a further document. In our case, it says Dr. Alexander Nussbaum, age 37 years, wife Anna, age 32, and child Andras Joseph, age 6 months. These proposed immigrants are citizens of Hungary residing in Italy, whose entry is applied for by a brother of the first named, Eugene Nussbaum, merchant of Montreal. It is stated Dr. Alexander Nussbaum is a specialist in orthodontia, that he already has deposited $10,000 to his credit in a Canadian bank. will bring forward dental equipment and effects to the value of an additional $6,000 and proposes engaging in his profession in Montreal.
Once the word came through that the visas were to be issued, the family got busy packing and getting ready to leave. Several documents chronicle those preparations, which Andrew described to me during our 2016 interview.
A certificate stating that they were residents of Italy, that I was this is written in Italian. It says basically that Alexander Nussbaum, 37 years of age, medical doctor, son of Joseph, they marked Giuseppe, and Broda Rosa, which is my grandmother's maiden name, born in Papa, Hungary, resident of this city, which is Torino. This document is entitled Città di Torino, city of Torino. And it says resident of this city from 1928 until the present time, which is 1938, 10 years, at the residence of Napione number 15, and that the residence is going to be moved to Montreal, Canada, with my mother, Nagy Anna, which is her maiden name, daughter of Emerico, which is Imre, his real name was Imre, Hungarian, 33 years of age, my mother, born in Kikinda, Nagy Kikinda, which is Hungarian, later became Velika Kikinda under the Yugoslav name, which took over Hungary, and of their son Andrea, which is me, obviously, born in Torino, 1st June 1938. My birth certificate actually states Andrea Giuseppe Nussbaum, and pertains to the this family, and this document is dated 24th November 1938. This is a document issued by an insurance company in Torino, which lists all the items of shipment to Canada. And as I mentioned, I believe their personal documents were permissible to ship, money was not. But here lists, in Italian of course, the entire list of personal effects, office equipment, scientific equipment, medical and dental equipment of an entire dental office. And it's all listed here with stamps on it to make it official, and with insurance and everything else, showing that these items are traveling from Genova, Italy, on the Capo Olmo, which is the name of the ship, on the 17th of February 1939 to Montreal. And the total price of the shipment, including insurance, was 12,367 Italian lira. I'm holding in my hand right now my parents' passports showing Hungarian citizenship. These are of quite a bit of interest because listed in there, first of all, I'm listed on one of these with my parents. In the first part of the passport, which is identifying the holder, they have a question, they have a statement on religion of the holder, which is strange because I don't know why they have religion on there, but they do. And in this particular case, the religion is crossed out, eradicated. To me, that doesn't make any sense, because if they eradicated it, it must mean they're trying to hide something. And what they're trying to hide is the fact that they're Jewish. So I don't understand what good it is to do this, because it's an open statement that there's something here that they don't want you to see. So I don't know what, but at any rate, these passports show the documentation of the visas for Canada, written in Hungarian and in French. In my case, it even shows on one of the trips in September 1938, going to Yugoslavia, that I'm traveling in the company of my nurse, and her name is listed here that as a travel companion. So
Is it to visit your grandparents?
right,
Okay.
very very good. I'm looking here at here's the actual movement. It says 23rd of January 1939. There's a passport here going from the stamp going from in the train, the frontier of Italy and France. Modane is the name of the town. The entry to France, it says visa in transit for Canada, 26 January 1939. And then there's the stamp of the Government of Canada, entrance, visa from Ottawa, with that number, which was the one that was issued under the special order in council, which I mentioned before. And this shows the stamp of Canadian Immigration, Lacolle, Quebec, which is on the border with Vermont. And it shows here, landed immigrant, February 11th, 1939. So that was the day of entry to Canada. Here it shows transit of the American Consulate General of Paris, saying that this passport is issued for Canada with transit from the United States, port of entry, New York, February 9th, 1939. We left in January and we managed to purchase tickets on the Rex, which was a very large passenger ship with high level, high quality transatlantic steamer which sailed from Cannes to New York. And so we went by train from Italy to Cannes and got on the ship. Also attached here is a cabin sticker for luggage on the Italian line sailing from Cannes on the French Riviera to New York. And this is written by my mom. Names Alexander Nussbaum.
After the decision to leave Italy and the quick preparations to pack their things and get their documents to allow them to go to Canada, it was still not easy to leave, even though they knew they had no real choice. Anna related her emotions on the day they left Torino.
It was in the paper, and everybody talked about it, that the Jews cannot, the Gentiles cannot be friends anymore with the Jews, and they cannot do that, and they cannot do that. And when we came out to the platform, we took the train to Paris first from Turin, and the people, the patients, they were all out there, and with flowers and chocolates, and the baby, they loved children, and the baby Andrew, so they just couldn't, and they cried, and they were all, and when they heard, the patients heard that we go, during the time when we decided that we are going, we had very high-ranking officers, generals, and all very famous people who was fascists. I mean, but they were not really fascists. They came in the office and they took off the fascist things, and they cried. Definitely, all people cried that came there and said, "Doctor, don't go away, please. We hide you up in the mountains. We give you false papers. We do everything. Just please don't." He says, "That cannot happen to Italians, such a thing." They were and they were real high things it has, fascist general and fascist, very influential people, but they were very nice. My husband said, no, this is, my son was just born and Mussolini doesn't want him, I go. So it went. But I cried. I cried all the time after 5. We came here for 3 months or 4 months. I cried all the time and said, get back to Italy, get back. I knew that we can go back.
And about 3 days out, the story that I'm told all the time was the night that I almost died. What happened is, I being about 7 or 8 months old, they were in my parents were in the dining room, and it was a dressed up type of affair. It was a luxury liner, and all of a sudden in the middle of the meal, my father jumps up, not my mother, my father, and rips off his napkin and starts running out of the dining room. My mother says, where are you going? I mean, you people here, and where are you going? He says, I've got to check the baby. He was running like a maniac back to the room, and sure enough, when he gets to the room, he finds me that there was a nurse on board. There were people who were taking care of children. Apparently she had left the room. And my thrashing around in the bed, it wasn't a crib. And what happened is that I had fallen off, and the bed covers had fallen on top of me, and they were pretty heavy, and I was suffocating. But being a physician, he was able to revive me through artificial respiration, because he says I was all blue and it was almost over. But he managed to save my life. And from that point onward, he didn't leave the room for the rest of the voyage. And anyway, then we arrived in New York, where we were met by the other members of the family who had come down from Montreal, as well as Dr. Weiss and his wife, who lived in New York. As I mentioned before, one of the Magdas, who was the daughter of my Aunt Sabin, had married Dr. Paul Weiss, who was originally Hungarian also. His parents were Hungarian, and he had studied medicine in Vienna, and that's where he had met her. But he was already living, his family was already living in New York. So after he finished his medical studies, he came back to New York and brought his wife with him, and was living in the city. He was living in Queens and working as a physician. So he, of course, met us, and we stayed with him for a day or two in New York. And then we took a train from New York to Montreal. We were allowed to be in the U.S. in transit only. In other words, in transit to Canada. We had a visa which allowed us to be in the United States for like 5 days, and that's all, as we transported ourselves to Canada. And we arrived in Montreal in February the 11th, 1939, in the height of the winter. And in those days, the winter in Montreal was absolutely wicked. It's gotten much easier over the years. And I'm told that it was extremely cold, very, very heavy snow. And my father and mother were extremely depressed about all this after having left Italy. It was a very depressing business. And of course, he then began to try to establish himself as a physician in Canada, which proved to be an utter fiasco. It became, first of all, in those days, Canadians as such, especially French Canadians, were not very used to European immigrants. Secondly, not to professional immigrants. Workers is one thing, but when it comes to professions, they were not ready to accept professionals into the fields of medicine, dentistry, and the like. And it was very difficult for him to become established, and he did a lot of checking around. We had gotten an apartment on Crescent Street in Montreal, and I had become very ill that first winter as a baby, but luckily next door to us lived a Dr. Goldblum. who was a very well-known Jewish physician in Montreal, who later became a politician in Quebec, and his son also was a doctor. He became very well known in Montreal. At any rate, my father had a great deal of difficulty. He contacted the universities, the licensing boards, and all these things, and it took months and months and months for him to get papers over here and get in contact where he could find out the story. And the net effect was that he was not able to be granted a license as a physician, nor was he able to go back to school and study it, and so that he could qualify as a physician in Quebec. So it was very, very, in the meantime, he was spending a lot of money, of which he didn't have that much, to live, and no income was coming in. My uncles were not able to help. They had 2 young children. Each family had a child, Joe and Claire. My parents thought that they would be able to settle in Montreal and my father would be able to practice his profession there. This was not to be the case because there's several letters here where there were people, this Benjamin Goldfield, who's the same attorney who arranged for the orders in council to be issued, who was influential in obtaining these. He also was familiar with a doctor in Toronto, to which he introduces my father and saying that he has been admitted to Canada, and he has asked him to send you an autobiography from which you will notice his high standing that he had in Europe and the professorships at the university, and his specialty of orthodontia, which he wasn't really a specialist in orthodontia, so I don't know where they got that from, but that he's an author of note, lecturer, and university professor, and that this letter is being written by this attorney, Benjamin Goldfield, on his behalf, my father's behalf, with a view that possibly this doctor in Toronto can secure him a position of a demonstrator or lecturer at the university, and that he can arrange to have him take the dental examinations. This did not happen. There's other letters relating to that same issue where this fellow doctor that he wrote to in Toronto wrote back to my father direct and said he read the draft of his letter and he believes that it covers the subject very thoroughly. All of these letters back and forth did not succeed in getting the right to take the examinations in Ontario. And the letter that I have here, which states all of this, is as follows. In June the 12th of 1939, letter written to my dad in Montreal, we're already there, of course, saying, Dear Dr. Nussbaum, at the recent meeting of the Board of Directors, the Royal College of Dental Surgeons of Ontario, your application for a license was carefully considered, together with the certificate submitted, and the following resolution was adopted. Quote, that the application of Dr. Nussbaum for admission to practice dentistry in Ontario is refused, as he has not complied with the requirements for dental education. This is a laugh, because he was practicing in Italy for 10 years, plus he had diplomas in medicine and in dentistry, but he didn't have what they are used to seeing, which is a 4-year course in dentistry. Also attached here is a complete curriculum vitae, what they call, or autobiographical history of his entire career, connections, doctors, letters of recommendation, etc., signed by my dad. And then also to the members of the College of Dental Surgeons of the province of Quebec. Instead of Ontario, as trying Ontario, also tried Quebec. And that he's calling this the humble petition of Alexander Nussbaum, presently of the city of Montreal, formerly practicing dental surgeon in the city of Torino in Italy. And it goes through the whole background. Submitted Montreal, April 19th, 1939. Written in English and in French, and signed by him. Then there's various documentation from Italy that was brought over, that was translated to submit with this, of letters of recommendation, various other things that were submitted, and sort of needless to say, that did not happen either, as far as him getting a permission. How he actually got to Nova Scotia, I'm not sure. I know that he also traveled to Manitoba, to Winnipeg, to attempt to see if he could get into Manitoba, and that didn't work out either. So basically, Nova Scotia was the next possibility.
Then my father decided, through various contacts or whatever, to try other parts of Canada. And he tried Toronto, the West, and it soon became evident that as a physician he would not be able to practice without a great deal of difficulty. Then he switched over and said, well, if I cannot practice medicine, I should concentrate on dentistry, which is what he did in Italy. So even in dentistry, it was difficult. It was very, very difficult. It finally came to light that there were only two places in Canada that he could possibly establish that would allow him to at least to discuss his possibilities in dentistry. And they were the provinces of Manitoba and Nova Scotia. People told him, don't go to Manitoba, the winter there is absolutely impossible. If Montreal is bad, Manitoba's 10 times as bad, the city of Winnipeg. So he chose Halifax, Nova Scotia, and went down to Halifax, spoke to the dean of the university, and finally was able to gain admission to the dental school in the second year. In other words, they gave him credit for 2 years. And he had to do the other 2 years of dental school over again. After having been a practicing dentist for over 10 years in Europe, this was not recognized. So, again, there was a problem of how to live during that period of time. But he looked at it this way and said, well, okay, I'm sorry, there's an error, let me go back. It was not 2 years he had to do, it was 1 year. They gave him credit for 3 years. So we went back, so we decided to move to Halifax. The war was in full force. My mother was very, very upset because of the disposition of the people in Europe that she had left behind, notably her parents. There was no contact of any kind. It was very difficult. And that on top of living in a country where you don't know the language and where you have great difficulties in being accepted by people. It was a very trying time.
Came over here and I was not too happy at all. I left this nurse there, what was with Andrew, and I had a very, very good maid, excellent maid. She was wearing always white gloves and serving us, just two of us, not to dinner, and she cooked and she washed and she sewed up if it's not button was loose or anything, and she always told me she can go shopping for grocery, and I said sometimes I let her, but most of the time I went there. And that was already, I didn't work then in the office, and so I mean she was excellent, and they both wanted to come with me to Canada. They said, well, I can take them, and they cried and so on, but it was very bad.
It was around June of 1939 that the family decided to settle in Nova Scotia, Alec having failed to get credentials to practice dentistry in either Quebec or Toronto. In June of 1939, he registered with the Provincial Medical Board of Nova Scotia, even before he was accepted to dental school to get his credentials. He must have had some indication he would be accepted.
There's one letter here where he wrote to the dean of the dental school at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We were living at Beach Street in Halifax, which was a home owned by a very nice family by the name of Feinberg. that the Jewish community appointed to help us out. And he had an empty house because he owned several pieces of real estate, this guy. He was a merchant, so he let us use his house. I don't know whether it was rent-free or not, but we lived there for about a year.
Right.
And in 1939, August, which is just following through these months here, he was already in Nova Scotia, and he wrote to the Dean of Dental School saying, "I hereby make application for admission to the Dalhousie Dental School as a dental student for the coming semester." It was a letter issued August 21st to my father by the Dean of the Dental School saying, replying to your, dear Dr. Nussbaum, replying to your letter of August 18th, 1939, and in line with our conversation of August the 16th, I have to advise you that you will be accepted for registration in the Faculty of Dentistry. You will be attached provisionally to the senior class, attending lectures, laboratory, and infirmary periods of that class. At the end of 4 or 5 weeks, it will be decided whether you remain in the senior class or that you complete the year with the junior class. In other words, a demotion. Whether you will look forward to see 1 or 2 years at the dental school before writing your degree examinations. The registration will take place on September the 12th, and you can be expected to register at that time. So he went ahead and did register. Here is the acceptance. The first, second, and third years were exempt based on his medical diplomas. Exempt, exempt, exempt. Fourth year of dental school, and here are the marks that he that he achieved, which weren't that great, but you have to understand also, he didn't speak the language at all. So how he even got to this point, I don't know. But here are the marks. Dalhousie University. Degree was conferred May the 14th, 1940. And here are the marks. Dr. Nutley was admitted to the 4th year of the dental course at this university and given credit for complete matriculation, the pre-dental requirements, and the first 3 years of the course by reason of work previously done leading to the MD degrees in Vienna and Rome. 4th year dentistry, he received passing grades and distinction in one field, surgery, anesthetics, and physical diagnostics, distinction. The others were pass grades. 50 was a pass. He only got 52 in history, ethics, and jurisprudence. And 59, 60, 70, 65. Anyway, total thing was a pass. So he received the diploma from Dalhousie University, granting him the doctorate in dental surgery, which I believe I have the diploma, which you have already seen, I believe. Here's the diploma. Doctor Dentaria Chirurgiae. In other words, Dalhousie University, Doctor of Dental Surgery.
While Alec was working to complete his final year of dental school at Dalhousie, the new immigrant family experienced so much change from what they had in Europe. They had been respected members of the community, a physician's family, and now they were set back to starting over as if none of that life ever happened. Alec had practiced as a dental surgeon for 10 years in Italy, and now he had to repeat his final year of dental school. Anna had run her household as a physician's wife with domestic help and spending her time in the company of wealthy Jewish women. And now she needed help to function day to day with a new baby in a new country, not speaking the language.
My husband was desperate after all the wonderful things what in Italy he had, and he built up himself such a life. We had a lodge in the theater, we had the event, one the concert to the opera, we had friends, very, very rabbi Jewish friends and not Jewish friends. Some Jewish friends, there were very rich Jewish people there in Turin, very rich. I never saw that time, and I saw after maybe, but I never saw diamonds like that. You know how big diamonds, I am not exaggerating, if not that big. 10 carats, 12 carats, something enormous.
One of the worst parts of their early life in Halifax was their worry about their families back in Europe. Alec's family had mostly died before the war or else had come to Canada, so they proceeded to inquire about Anna's family back in Yugoslavia. The first correspondence we have is a questionnaire Alec filed with the Canadian Red Cross Society in May 1941. In it, he asked for information about his father-in-law, Anna's father, Imre Nagy. In response, he received a note from Yugoslavia sometime in 1942, which says, "This family is not in Velika Kikinda anymore." They also received a response from the Red Cross Agency of Prisoners of War in Geneva on March 3, 1942, which reported having investigated one of the references Alec provided, a Dr. Vidak in Velika Kikinda, who reported that Imre Nagy was no longer in Velika Kikinda and he didn't know where he was.
Alec tried several other avenues to locate Anna's family in Yugoslavia, to no avail. Around the beginning of 1942, he wrote to the United Jewish Refugee and War Relief Agency, asking for help in locating the Nagy family in Velika Kikinda. That agency wrote to the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee in New York City, which said, "We have the utmost sympathy with the anxiety of Dr. and Mrs. Nutley and wish we could be helpful to them. However, the Nagys are in Yugoslavia, and since this is German-occupied territory, we are prohibited from communicating either directly or indirectly with persons in that area. Such an attempt would be in violation of the Trading with the Enemy Act." They then referred them to the American and International Red Cross, who the Nutleys had already been in touch with. No one could track down Anna's parents. Following the surrender of the German forces in Europe in May of 1945, Alec again attempted to locate Anna's family in Yugoslavia. On July 24, 1945, he received a letter from the Undersecretary of State for External Affairs in Montreal, informing Alec that because Mrs. Nutley's relatives are not British subjects, I regret there is nothing this department can do to locate them. The author of the letter advises Mrs. Nutley to try to use postal and telegraph services, which were then restored, to try to locate her family. The last document Alec had regarding the search for Anna's family in Europe was a short note from the Consulate General of Democratic Federative Yugoslavia in Montreal, which said simply, "Imre Nagy, former apothecary, pharmacist, of this place, was in 1942 deported by enemy, with all other Jews, to an unknown place, and from that time he has not been heard of." And that seems to be the last time Alec and Anna attempted to find her parents and sister in Europe, when they found out they had in fact been deported with all the other Jews from Yugoslavia. No other documentation of their fate was ever found.
So anyway, well then in Halifax we became very alright. It took a long time to get used to it, and as I say, I did not speak English. And Harry's wife was a very good friend. She came every day to see me, every day. And she tried to explain to me with the hands and so on, and what I do, how the cooking is, and different. It was different in Italy. And I didn't have too much cooking to do. I had that wonderful maid, and I had the nurse, and I didn't have any washing the diapers or anything, you know. So this time in Halifax I had to do all these things. So anyway, she was very, very nice, and slowly I started to talk and get used to the things, and then my husband managed to practice. In the beginning was not so that Lampert was so nice. He was sending these Norwegians all to us, and they paid this cash, and they paid any price one, and he sent them all. I mean, they all needed dentures and all that things. That's how we started the practice. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult. That was really, as would have sent from the God, you know. It was really something special.
Then, of course, he commenced to open a practice in Halifax, which is where I grew up, and which was a nice experience in my life, and quite successful living there. Developed a lot of very good friends, and it was a very good background in various things there. So that's really the story as far as the basics of the move were concerned.
In 1943, Alec and Anna finalized their name change. After meeting Dr. Ernest Lampel, another Hungarian Jew in Halifax who was described earlier as making a significant change in their lives, the Nussbaums decided to take his advice and change their name to Nutley. Dr. Lampel believed they couldn't be successful with the German Jewish name and that they had to change it.
My name is, my husband was Nussbaum. What is a really Jewish name? I mean, my father was, when he was a young man, Grossman, but he changed it over to Nagy. So when I was born, I was already Nagy.
Why did he change?
Well, they used to be in Hungary. They made these names Hungarized. You know, they changed it. Grossman was a Jewish, like we changed it. Nussbaum, I mean, during the war in Halifax, we had that friend, that Lampel, you see, and he didn't let Alec. Every day he bothered back about him, like, you have to change your name for the sake of the son. You cannot be having this German name for now when the Germans are there. You have to change it. So Alex said, well, okay, change it. So he went and found out, he said to him, you find a name. And he found that Nutley.
In 1945, Alec became a citizen of Canada after being there 6 years. Along with his naturalization, his son Andrew became a citizen as well, as a minor child.
During the years of living in Halifax, he had the idea that he didn't want to remain there permanently. He found that he wasn't used to the kind of place that Halifax was, because in those days it was very backward. Didn't have the cultural activities that he was used to in Italy. Although he had very good friends there, he didn't want to continue practicing regular dentistry. That was not what he wanted to do. He'd gotten involved in quite a bit of research, and he wanted to, and there were some of those research things were carried out, and there were papers that he wrote, research papers that were well accepted in the discipline. And so he wanted, first of all, to see if he could move to other parts of Canada. He didn't want to leave Canada at that point. But in trying to get a degree, in trying to get a license to practice in other provinces, there was a definite amount of anti-Semitism that was exhibited. In one case, for example, there was a representative of another dentist in Halifax who was representing the National Dental Boards. And he kept applying for the right to take these exams, and kept taking the exams, and each time he got a failing grade. So he found that to be very strange, and he went to the dentist who was in charge in Nova Scotia. And while that dentist was out of the office, he saw a paper on the desk with his name on it. So even though it wasn't his, he decided to look at that paper. And in that paper, he found there was a letter written by the head person in Canada, that was the head of the dental boards, writing a letter to this representative in Halifax saying to him, once again, we see this guy attempting to take the boards so he can practice elsewhere in Canada. We don't need his type in other parts of Canada. We would rather not see him be here. You're stuck with him. You can keep him. And he's going to keep failing these grades as long as he keeps trying to move.
Right.
So at that point, the light went on in my father's head, and he said, aha, I see now where we stand here.
Yeah.
So up to that point, he didn't believe that this was really true or that it could be, but it was. So even though we didn't experience anti-Semitism amongst the normal population, and I certainly didn't growing up, in the professional circles it was definitely there.
Yeah.
Even other things in Halifax like that we knew about. For example, there was a swim club that was very sort of populated by professionals. There were no Jews permitted. So I mean, these things happen, and they happen in Montreal even more so. It's gotten a bit better now, but this is the way it used to be. So anyway, as these things evolved, of course, and the more research and other things that he got involved with, he decided that he was going to try to see if he could get a position in the United States involved in teaching or research. And since he had so many connections within those fields in the U.S., and since he had already gone to many times to the University of Chicago and University of Illinois to do some research, by closing his practice and going there to do research that was original, he was very familiar with a fellow by the name of Dr. Isaac Schauer, PhD, DDS, that he knew from Vienna. And under his auspices, he was able to go to Chicago, sometimes for periods of a few months at a time, and do this research. And it was on the basis of one of these projects that he wrote a paper, which I have here, called The Effect of Estrogen on the Alveolar Tissues of Molars in Rats and Mice. And if you'll see there, my dad is the head man on that project, along with others. And that was performed at the University of Illinois. You'll see down at the bottom where this work was done.
Mm-hmm.
And this was highly prestigious, and it was highly. He presented this paper at a conference, journal at the. It says on there that this was presented. This investigation was supported in part by a research grant from the National Institute for Dental Research of the NIH, United States Public Health Service. It was presented at the General Meeting of the International Association of Dental Research, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, March 22nd, 1953. And it was on the basis of that talk that he was offered a position in Boston under Dr. Henry Goldman, who, and based on this work that he made, that speech, based on the work he did at Chicago, he was offered a position in Boston at the Beth Israel Hospital on Brookline Avenue, right near Fenway Park. And at that hospital, which happened to be right around the corner from my school, Boston Latin School. So I used to drive there, drop off my dad at work, and take the car over to the school and go to school. Anyway, he worked for Goldman at the Beth Israel Hospital, where they had an advanced dental research clinic. So he was working there. And he was doing some other teaching at Harvard. Anyway, that period only lasted for less than 2 years because he was ill at the time, unbeknownst to him. I mean, he had an operation for cancer prior to that, but it developed and recurred. And so he passed away about 2 years after we moved there, a little less than 2 years. So that was the end of my Boston sojourn.
Following Alec's death in 1955, Anna decided to return to Montreal, where Alec's brothers and their families lived, and Andrew went to college there, where he remained until 1968, when he moved to New York with his then-wife Barbara and first child Monica, who was born in 1966. Anna remarried a family friend, Harry Weber, about a year after Alec died, having felt forlorn during that time period and at a loss for direction. After a year or so, she and Harry moved to Florida due to his health, where she remained for many years before returning to live in Montreal in the 1980s. She died in Montreal at age 85 in December 1990, only about a month after I went to see her to interview her for my project. Andrew stayed in the United States, never moving back to Canada. After the birth of his second child, me, in New York, the family moved to New Jersey in 1969. He divorced in 1975 and remarried in 1978, and he and his wife Elaine remained in New Jersey until 2000, when they lived out their plan of moving to Florida. They have 4 children between them and 6 grandchildren. If it weren't for Alec and Anna's swift decision to leave Italy in 1938, these generations would never have existed.